It wasn't all that long ago that when I first talked about the Odin 2 portal. In fact, it was probably, I think, Friday last week that video came out, and there's already some new information, and it's pretty important to whether or not you should buy this device or not. Before we jump into the important news, I'm going to run through real quick what has happened and what we currently know about the Odin 2 portal. Not too long ago, AYN put out a statement that they're making the portal, which is a new Odin 2-like device, and all we knew about it was it had an OLED screen that was 1080p 120Hz that will run the same Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 2 that the current Odin 2 uses. We don't know when exactly this device is releasing. That was pretty much it for what we've known so far, but in this new batch information, we do have a little bit more insight on the specs. We know there will be an 8, 12, and 16GB models with 128, 512, and 1TB storage options, matching each tier of RAM. So basically, 8GB of RAM, you get 120GB of storage. 12GB of RAM, you get 512GB of storage. 16GB of RAM, you get 1TB of storage. From the beginning, this device seemed to be pretty set on being targeted against the competitor from Aya, the AYN Evo, which that device compares to what we now know about the Odin 2 portal very similarly, but also a little bit different. It breaks down into similar spec tiers. There's 8 gigs with 128 and so on, but this device has two pretty different, decidedly, features compared to the portal. This device will come with a Snapdragon G3X Gen 2, which is pretty powerful, more optimized for Android native gaming and not so for dedicated emulation. It still holds up quite well, but just a bunch of the emulators aren't necessarily optimized to take advantage of what this SoC can offer. So the Odin 2 has still, to me at least, made more sense to purchase if you wanted the most out of specifically emulation. We do know the full retail price of the Pocket Evo when that fully releases will be $500. This device also comes with a 165Hz 1080p OLED display, which honestly is kind of crazy, and it makes sense why it's $500. In my previous video, we discussed that the Odin 2 portal needs to be very price competitive compared to the Evo for it to make sense. Because if they were the same price, the Evo is better on paper. So on a sheer specs wise thing, it doesn't make a lot of sense to buy the portal if it wasn't considerably cheaper. And thankfully, that's the news we got today, is that the Odin 2 portal, with its full specs released, is gonna be a pretty decent value. For the base model, full retail price is gonna be $350, which is the same price as the Odin 2 Mini. And I'll be honest, I'm leaning more towards the portal with the 120Hz OLED display. I've talked about in multiple other videos, but the extra RAM doesn't really help you all that much. Even when you're doing Nintendo Switch emulation, you don't really need more than 12GB of RAM, but 8 gigs you can get pretty much the same performance. Maybe it's like a frame or two less, maybe it's a little bit more hitchy, but I seriously don't see why anybody would need 16GB of RAM. In 12, you can make the argument for better Switch performance, but with the state of Switch emulators in general, kind of tough. So to me, 8 gigs has always made the most sense financially and value-wise. The Odin 2 that I personally use is 8GB, and I've never, felt constrained by that whatsoever. Especially if what you mostly do is GameCube and PS2 and Wii level emulation, you don't really exceed that much by at all. So you'll be just fine with 8 gigs, and with a microSD card expansion, 120GB storage isn't that bad. All the ROMs that I like to play and have on all my devices takes up roughly 64GB, so I honestly don't need that much space. If you're heavily invested in the Wii, GameCube, and PS2 level of emulation, you might need more storage, which is why you should probably invest in a decently sized microSD card. But you can also buy a 1TB microSD card, like I did, for like $50, and with Black Friday around the corner, you could probably find some pretty decent deals on microSD cards here fairly soon, especially with Prime Day on top of that. I think many people should go down the route of just getting the 128 base model portal and just expand it with a microSD card, because to me that just makes the most sense. As I mentioned, For full retail pricing, the Odin 2 Portal is going to be $350, but for a limited time, you can get super early bird pricing for $299, a solid $300, $50 cheaper than full retail, which honestly is pretty good. And for early bird pricing, it's $329, the same price as a standard Odin 2. Something I would like to see is once this device is fully released, we can see a price drop for the original Odin to $300. But I can understand why they might not want to do that. That might eat into sales of the Portal and the Mini, just because all three of those devices share the same exact specs and perform functionally identically. But comparing the price to the Evo, for full retail for each of their base models, the Portal is $150 cheaper, which is a pretty solid chunk of change and introduces just an incredible value for the high-end emulation space. There aren't very many emulation handhelds that come with an OLED screen. The only one that really comes to mind immediately is the Anbernic 556. But that one's only 60 Hz. For a suitably high-end device, I haven't really heard very many of them having OLED displays in the first place. And now that we're getting two solid options, and they're at very different price points, but they perform very similarly, to me, it's now a no-brainer that you should probably just go ahead and buy the Portal when that comes out, opposed to the Pocket Evo. Sure, it has the more high-end processor with the G3X Gen 2, but would you want to spend $150 more for basically what amounts to like 5% better performance? To me, I always saw the Pocket Evo as more optimized for dedicated Android gaming. Think Warzone Mobile, Stardew Valley, Minecraft, Dead Cells, those high-end like real Android games that are just actual full-size AA indie hit kind of games. Excluding Warzone Mobile, that's just a normal like AAA developer making a mobile game. But you get what I mean. And the Portal is more optimized for emulation. It has the more optimized for emulator SoC with the standard Snapdragon SoCs. That's important because a lot of these emulation developers can't optimize for every kind of processor out there, and they optimize for what is the most popular, the standard normal phone Snapdragon line. So broadly speaking, a lot of these emulators are more optimized for a more standardized, more popular and widespread processor. Sure, the G3X2 is on paper more powerful and can sometimes even outperform the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 2 found in the Odin 2 quite often when it comes to emulation, but it's not so much so that is a completely, oh my god, this is a substantially better experience. It's just better if those people who can really pixel peep their way and super scrutinize and notice all these finite differences. But I know where my money's going, and it's not the Evo. I would love to hear what you guys think. Are you excited that we finally have pretty much all the information we need about the Portal? Are you going to pick one up for super early bird pricing? Are you excited? Are you going to wait for reviews? I would love to hear what you guys think down below. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. All the other social media coverage down below. And last but not least, have a wonderful day.